views. Top U.S. military officials, including General David Petraeus, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and just a few days ago in a security conference in Israel, former National Security Advisor General James Jones, have all pointed to the fact that the continuing Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the lack of a two-state solution greatly complicates America's security tasks throughout the Middle East. So the lack of progress can be seen in, the harmful effects of the lack of progress can be seen in lots of different ways. Two states will not solve all America's problems in the region. It would make almost all of them somewhat easier to address. So the bottom line here is that in foreign policy, sometimes we face big trade-offs between our moral preferences and our security interests. This is one of those rare and happy moments where the moral outcome, self-determination for two peoples, is also consistent with everyone's security interests. In security terms, two states is a win-win-win. This is why President Obama said in his Cairo speech, two states for two peoples is in America's interest, Israel's interest, the Palestinians' interests, and the world's interest, and he was right. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lenore, and thank all of you for coming out this afternoon. I add a special note of thanks to Lenore for all her tireless efforts in organizing us. It was often like herding cats, and in fact, herding old cats, I must say, which is probably even worse.
Watch that, Richard.
Not all of us, some of us. I want to begin on an optimistic note, and you'll see where I end in a few moments. I want to reflect a little bit on the decade of the 1990s, particularly the early 1990s. It was a period of enormous hope in what we might call the Arab-Israeli zone and the Middle East. Gulf War had ended, Cold War had ended, there was special amity in the UN, and there was extraordinary optimism that this conflict that we're talking about would be coming to an end. First President Bush and the Secretary of State, James Baker, worked very, very hard to put together a structure for building peace, including the multilateral negotiations that Alan Berger referred to. I remember participating in some of those discussions about issues like refugees and water and economic development and security, and suddenly it became normal to go to a meeting in some European capital or Middle Eastern country or North American country and find Israelis and Arabs talking to one another. Israel was able to achieve diplomatic relations, or in many cases quasi-diplomatic relations, with more than a half a dozen Arab states. In the West Bank and Gaza, there was a sense that life might finally be improving, that an occupation might be coming to an end. Camp David Accords, the Oslo Accords, 1993, in which the U.S. played no significant role. In fact, the only role the U.S. played was Bill Clinton basically catering the signing on the White House lawn, serving those little cookies. But nonetheless, a context in which there was enormous hope made possible by resolve on the part of the Palestinians to reach a negotiated solution, and resolve on the part of the Israeli leadership, not least Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, to bring this conflict to an end. It was really a special moment, and it bears remembering because it gives us a sense of what a two-state solution coming into view might actually accomplish again. But as you know, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli terrorist in 1995. He was replaced after a short period of time by a prime minister, Bibi Netanyahu, whose declared intention was to destroy the Oslo agreements. The U.S. was led by a president who did cram for the exam at the last minute in the meetings in Camp David, but spent most of his administration not doing very much to keep these accords alive, and deployed on his behalf diplomats who, unfortunately, in my view, are still involved, who proved extremely ineffectual in terms of their ability to negotiate important agreements. So that moment was lost. Now, what would it take to recapture that moment? What would it take on the part of U.S. leadership? And here I think we need to emphasize the signal importance of the role of the U.S. president. You know, there are some conflicts in the world that can be solved by skilled diplomats. Go back to the 1990s, look at the tremendous work done by U.S. Ambassador Chester Crocker in Africa. This was done with skilled, knowledgeable diplomacy. Look at the election in the Sudan, which has now led to the emergence of a new republic of the Southern Sudan, which will come into formal existence in the spring. Made possible by skilled diplomats from the U.S., from the UN, from many countries, Japan, etc. But this conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and particularly the Israeli-Palestinian dimension that we're really focusing on in the study group, requires the active hand of the United States of America. The United States and Israel's interests are deeply entangled with one another. It may be great for the Israeli sense of security. In my view, it's not very good for U.S. interest, but it's a reality. It makes any serious attempt to seek peace an attempt that needs to be pursued at the highest levels of our government. So what are the 6 conditions, in my view, for a president to successfully reach a solution in resolving this conflict? 1 is resolve. In other words, understanding that this is a priority. This is a matter of U.S. interest. Steve Walters already talked about that. I think many U.S. presidents, many officials, past and present, understand the importance of this interest in terms of U.S. interest. 2 is time, focus. This takes an enormous amount of time. Even though he spent 7 years not doing much about it, look how much time Clinton ended up spending in the last year of his administration trying to bring together a solution. It requires political courage, precisely because we're so entangled with Israel. 2 issues, for example, illustrate this, and they're very much related. The question of the settlements, which are illegal under international law. The 4th Geneva Convention specifically prohibits an occupying power from transferring population into occupied areas. Virtually all the world outside of the United States in recent years has spoken clearly about the illegality of this colonization of occupied territory. President Obama, in his talk in Cairo, did speak to the illegitimacy of these settlements, but he didn't go a step further. It would be very important for a president to do that, but it takes real courage. And related to that, we have charities in this country which are raising money, taking tax deductions through their annual tax returns and so on, and enjoying, in some cases, nonprofit status that are supporting this illegal settlement activity. We're doing nothing about it. It takes courage to do something about it, but the president has not grabbed that bull by the horns, and it takes courage to do it. 4, you need an opportunity. You need to have belligerents who are ready to negotiate. I think we have that on the part of the Palestinians. I'm not sure we have that on the part of the Israeli government. There are those, like Dennis Ross, so far a 2-time loser, I think probably a 3-time loser when this is all over, who have said that Netanyahu is a man you can make peace with. I'm not sure of that. I think he's playing a game, he's playing for time, and so far he's winning that game. You need the skills and balance that are requisite for reaching a negotiation. We need negotiators that are going to take the interest of both sides seriously and not basically play such a unbalanced role that we basically discredit and incapacitate our own ability to successfully negotiate. And finally, you need luck. It's difficult, but we do know what a solution looks like. The template is very well known. This is unlike many conflicts where basically finding a solution, designing a solution is part of the problem. In this case, we very much know what the template looks like. go back to the Clinton parameters that are released at the end of his term, very clearly represents a consensus of what a solution is going to look like. But it's going to take look. So what is my perspective now? It's actually very dour. I don't expect there to be a two-state solution. There may be, by some significant sort of political change of mood and whatever in Israel, a different government, much more attuned to making peace. I don't see that happening. And I don't see a U.S. domestic environment in which a president is going to be willing to make the investment in time, in political courage, and so on, to pull this off. So I don't think the conditions are there. I joined this group with a certain amount of skepticism. I'm now extremely skeptical that we're going to see a solution. And with that, over time, I see a problem that will continue to fester, continue to cause great problems for the United States, and continue to be a significant complaint around the world, and particularly the Muslim world, vis-a-vis the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Everett, you have quite a job. There's 2 minutes left.
Well, 5
Just
questions
easy.
and answers in 5 minutes. First, is the two-state solution the right one, and is it still viable? One thing is clear. Historically, since solutions have been searched for, beginning in 1947 when the UN took over the territories from the British Mandate, division into 2 states was the model that was worked on. As you recall, in 1947, there was to be a partition of the Mandate territory in Palestine, 56% going to the Jews, 43% going to the Palestinians, 1% becoming a separate area under UN rule of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. 1949, after the battle, after the Arabs turned down that agreement and war ensued, the Israelis had pushed the boundaries back, and in 1949 the armistice had 88% of the territory being Israel, 22% being Palestinian. After the 1967 war, you'll recall the Israelis were successful, took over the whole of the Palestinian territories, in addition to the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt and the Golan Heights from Syria. You recall at that time, the United Nations Security Council enacted the Proposition 242, which called for a solution of the separation again, and there being the return of territories and 2 states. The changes that began occurring, and they were slow. The first big change to occur in 1988, when the PLO finally recognized Israel within the 1967 borders and was willing to make peace with it. Belligerency still existed. And then, of course, the 1993 Oslo Accords, which have been discussed at some length. The big question that emerges as we look at it today, with all the settlers that have moved into the West Bank and East Jerusalem, areas that would have become part of the 2 separated states, is there still time? Is a 2-state solution still viable? We still largely believe in it, although I think you heard from many of my colleagues some question as to whether it is still possible to achieve. 2, how do you assess the interests of Israel and the Palestinians, the Israelis and Palestinians in peacemaking? Do the Israelis and Palestinians know how to negotiate agreements? Yes, they do. How effective will they be? Oslo is a classic example. The Israelis and Palestinians successfully negotiate an agreement without the United States even being involved. As someone commented, Clinton gave the party at the end in Washington. In retrospect, the agreement negotiated was probably not good enough to stand the pressures of what would happen on the ground by those who wanted to undermine it. And from 1993 to 2011, we look at the decline of what's happened. There's another factor which I think is important, hasn't been mentioned yet, and I don't think we even mention it in our study, and that is the change in the nature of the Israeli population over the last 2 decades. 1 million new immigrants from the former Soviet Union have arrived in Israel, out of a total population of just over 7 million.